In the next 20 plus minutes, you will hear about two features, collections and blueprints, or as we more prefer to hear, call it internally, like search blueprints. I will talk about the present, that 80% that Marco and Brian also referred to, that hopefully we did right, but also acknowledging that 20 or maybe 40% that maybe there is room for improvement. So if these features are new to you, well, you will not only learn, hopefully, new ways of doing things that you have been doing for a very long time, but you can also see how the similarities and the strengths of these features enable us to work on something unified. To put things in perspective, let's just see the journey that site builders and administrators go through to deliver content. And this three-stage model, I mean, it's just a simplification of the real world, but it allows us to put these activities, high-level activities, that helps us to go from one step to the final step to deliver this content to the end users. So the managing content side, first, again, just high level, this involves from modeling your business requirements, the structure of your content, even choosing the content type you will use. And this involves the full life cycle of the content items themselves, from publishing, versioning, grouping, and so on. Now, on the selection part is when, if we take two ways, one is you want to handpick a few items, and then you just want to handle them as a whole, or maybe you want to define the criteria of the characteristics of those content, then you will just select on the fly. But you do all this because you want to deliver that content, you want to show you on nice experiences, and people will engage and interact with the content through just simply like looking at them, but using like filters, suggestions, recommendations, and all those modern things you find. On a practical terms, Liferay offers tools for all of these activities and stages. So this is not a deep dive. This is not meant to be a full list of Liferay features. It's more focusing on what we really want to make you use. So on the managing side, for example, you can choose some web content and web content structures, like structures determining the information that the content creators can enter, that usually like in the form of the fields and their types. And we got objects, like you heard, and you will hear a lot about objects, our new way of modeling and creating applications without writing code, or asset libraries, which is kind of the new way to make content reusable across different sites. What is more interesting to this talk is on the selection phase, where historically it was asset publisher, right? Nowadays, you can more choose collections and collection providers. That's one of our guide today. And the other is blueprints or search blueprints, which might be surprising to you that it falls into this category. But if you replace selection with querying, you already get the idea. And then on the display side, again, it's not a full list, but you have the fragments, you can use search widgets, and the collection filters. So basically, you can use these tools from the managing, from selection, and then displaying. Let's start with collections first. Just highlighting a few features and useful parts of collections is that you can work with collections and mixed content types. And collections is really the evolution of those asset publisher configurations, when you could choose, hey, I want to just these few items, or I have these requirement, like from this site, give me web content articles, and that's it. And basically those configurations now are reusable as collections, so you create once and then use it on other pages. You can choose, as you will see, from a few filters that can drive the selection of your results. And You can also have programmatically created item sets. Basically, that's what we call collection providers. So you either create your own definition or you handpick those items, or instead, there are some programmatically created ones that you will able to use or even create your own. So that's the dynamic collection builder. What I wanted to highlight here are a few things. First, it follows a linear UI approach to go through. You can choose the content type, some filters from categories, tags, and keywords. And on the sidebar side or on the middle, you see that you can also manage different so-called variations for different user segments. So basically, in collections, the idea is that if you have user segments, you can have different criteria for the content. And that's the manual collection builder, where basically you get the same segmentation-based, like the configuration for segments, and then you can also choose the items, and you can also reorder the items. So that's the manual collection builder. And then, as I mentioned, there are the collection providers that, for example, if you have a page, you have the collection display fragment, then you can choose from either of those collections you created or these programmatically created ones that Liferay provides out of the box, or you can create your own using the info framework. Now, highlighting a few capabilities of collections is that you can already filter on select fields. For example, I have in my example a structure, a web content structure, which describes or represents ticket audit from my ticket system. And I have a date field, which I call reported on, and you can filter on a specific date. And that's what you can also do with a few other fields, which is already available. But what if you want content from a period of time? What if you have other criteria which is also based on another field of your structure? And what if you need a combination of all these or something more complex? Not a surprise that to some of these questions, Blueprints is the answer. So let's now see Blueprints. Blueprints was created from a different side. It was meant to be giving you a way to customize the search queries without writing Java code. It gives you a visual query builder and a handful of out-of-the-box query elements that you can use. For example, to hide, to filter content results, to filter by categorization, to boost results, and many other things. And if those out-of-the-box elements are not covering your use case, you have the option to create new ones. It's fully headless driven. You can export and import those blueprints created as JSON, and it covers more than just one thing. You can use it on search pages to drive search bar suggestions, in headless requests, as it was already mentioned. Also programmatically, if you're still using custom code. And now we have a bridge between the collection, the content display word, and search through the Blueprints collection provider. So that's the query builder in Blueprints. You see that it features elements grouped under different categories on the sidebar that you can add to the builder. And I added a few as an example. Now, one important aspect of Blueprints and the query builder is that it might look like, but it's not an empty canvas. You always start from something that the platform always adds to your search, no matter what you want to do. And then think of the elements as additions to your final search, which obviously might override what the system, well, not the system, but some of the, for example, the web content automatically contributes. Another thing, just like in collections, you can configure the type you want to search in. For example, in my case, you see that I have an object, which is representing tickets, and that's the type I'm interested in. Now, Blueprints is kind of like a Swiss Army knife to Liferay search, so you can do more than just simple configurations. One thing you can do to go advanced in your configuration when it comes to how your items should be ordered. One caveat is that right now you can only do this by entering the JSON configuration for sort. But the schema underneath is very powerful. One of the, I think, the most liked part of blueprints, especially for those who are technical, is the ability to reuse Elasticsearch queries. If you or your team has experience with Elasticsearch, you can reuse the body of the query, you put it in this element, you decide where it should go into the final search, and then that's it. Remember those limitations I mentioned about collections and the filtering, like date range, from a period of time giving you content? Well, with this custom element, you can cover that and even more complex use cases. That's already available. Of course, it needs some technical knowledge and some domain knowledge, but if these skills are already available, well, you can unlock these potentials. Another great part is that you can create actual custom elements with UI configuration. So not only you can create the query part of your element, you can also create with our editor your new element. For example, this one is a copy of one of the out-of-the-box elements. It's just turned it into more reusable by providing the option for the user to change whether it should contain or doesn't contain the categories that you are selecting. So this way, developers in your team can create the element once, and even non-technical people can configure the actual, like the categories and the selection mode later. And that's already available. Another thing, it was highlighted in the previous session that semantic search, so to get semantic results on your search bar suggestions, for example, that's also using blueprints under the hood. We provide a special element which is able to improve the results by rescoring the ones that your keyword would normally provide using large language models and the tools we have integration for, like TXT-AI, Hugging Face, and now OpenAI coming also as beta. Another not well-known capability of blueprints is that you can also create conditional and contextual queries. That means for example, this out-of-the-box element uses both. This hide content in a selected category for guest users is just an example, but what it does is first, it has a condition, because it should only do this for guest users. And the second part is we need to know this information, whether the user is signed in. So that's the contextual information. And Blueprints provides this building block for the conditional part and the schema, and some contextual information, part of the predefined context variables, and you can combine them to create your custom criteria like this, or even more complex. And that's already working. Again, it has a technical barrier, but the capability underneath is already in the product. Now, I mentioned that with the collection provider as a beta feature, now you have a way that if you create a blueprint, it will create a collection provider also. And that means it will return for you a list of asset entries currently and those asset entry fields. And then you can basically use the results of a blueprint in a content page, just like other collections. And that was an important step to close the gap between the pure content display part and search. Well, at this point, hopefully you have a better understanding of what these two guys are doing, collections and blueprints, and you might also formulate questions like this, like same, but different. One thing to compare is what they actually do. Basically, both are building a search query under the hood. But this is not only a technical necessity. It's also these tools are giving you ways to directly influence what goes into your final search query. But the way they do, that's the different part, is very different. Another thing yeah, both features, you can configure where you want to get content from. Sites, asset libraries. But they are very different visuals, and some of the behaviors actually also differ. But the functionality, the scope is there. Another thing, you want to control which content type you want to get returned, which collections called as source configuration, where you can not only select the type but the subtypes. Like subtype can mean a web content structure or a document file type in documents media. In Blueprints, you can select the top-level asset types only currently. It doesn't mean that you cannot filter by a specific structure. It's just, again, that extra technical mile you need to run to create that custom query. It's there. So if you have developers at hand, you can ask, they are familiar with Elasticsearch, or they already familiarized with the schema of Blueprints, then it can be solved. But out of the box, that's a difference between collections and Blueprints. Another example is you can filter by categories. That's a very common criteria we received and hear from partners, people, from you. You can do the same, but you can achieve the same with both features. But again, the way it's exposed to the user, they are a little bit different. And another thing which I think better highlights some of these nuances is how you can define the order of your items. In collections, you are presented with a drop-down of fields that you can choose from, and you can use those arrows to whether ascending or descending order you want. Now, in Blueprints, because it's a search query, and essentially, normally you don't want to define anything extra for your order because you want the search engine to calculate the relevance, how best the results match the user's queries. But sometimes, for example, later the user wants to still order by like title alphabetically or some other fields. And in Blueprints, you can configure that, but you need to use the schema we provide. And that's a technical thing. You don't have a builder. You don't have a UI for doing that. Another important aspect which is frequently used is like you have different user segments. So you need a way to kind of present content for different audiences, different segments differently. So to define those criteria. And in collections, if you have those segments, you can use that personalized variations. You can change the order. So basically the first one wins. And then you can change the criteria. Now in Blueprint, the information about the segment, so the user segment when it's interacting with a page, this is already available in the context information I mentioned before. But the way to use it to take advantage of this information, well, that's right now a technical exercise, because unless those out-of-the-box elements are covering your need, you are on the track of, okay, I need to use the schema, I need to put together a custom element, and that's the way to solve it. So it's already possible, but it's not configuration driven, not as easy as you might want. So as a summary, you can compare collections and Blueprints using these dimensions. So collections, we can say that it provides a familiar, maybe more user-friendly interface with familiar terminology from the rest of the product, and it's configuration-driven. So there's nothing that basically needs you to enter like JSON. But it's focusing on one use case, the content display. So you might say that it has a basic capability set. And it lives on the site level or asset library level, so you can access it through the product menu. Now, Blueprints is using a somewhat unique UI. a unique interface with a mix of low-code and configuration-driven parts. Remember that you can have those out-of-the-box elements and you can create custom ones. So it feels a little bit technical at some point, but it covers way more. You can use it on a search page, search bar suggestions, headless search API calls in your custom Java code. And don't forget that we have the Blueprint collection provider. So it's both offering basic and advanced capabilities, but it's specific to Elasticsearch, while collections using everything that our generic search API provides, so it runs on Solr and Elasticsearch, while Blueprints is right now specific to Elasticsearch. But it's already headless driven. You can export and import it as JSON, and it's extensible with the custom elements. So that's also very important that collections is not giving you. And as I mentioned, both are building a search query under the hood. So it looks like we provide solutions, two solutions for the same problem. At least for a user's perspective, for the same outcome. Blueprints UI is hard. When we started to look into this, we get these feedback, but it really means was some missing basic capabilities that don't need technical JSON thing. But we got the same feedback about collection, lacking filtering like time, period of time, range filters. So essentially, the user what expects, the outcome is the same, but we have two solutions. So there is an opportunity here. There is a challenge, and there is something to solve that extra 20 or 40%. So the two main problems we're focusing on right now is we have an overlap in the functionality. So it might be confusing which one to use. And maybe these limitations are coming up in different stage of the project delivery. And there are those limitations in the actual filters and options. So we want a unified solution that combines the ease of use of collections without losing the power of Blueprints. And of course, we want to extend the filtering capabilities. Now, in software development, if you have two features that don't fully solve the user's problem, the usual reaction is, okay, let's create a third one. That will solve it, right? But it comes with all those migration, upgrades, enablement, and adoption. Some of these challenges remain regardless of the approach, but maybe we have a different way to do. So what we are looking into is to create this unified experience by building on and enhancing Blueprints. What we're working on right now is search engine agnostic capabilities on the selection criteria and the filtering part. This will also make some adjustments to the query builder UI itself. And as I mentioned, the collection provider has some limitations, like only able to return a list of asset entries and not only the common fields of asset entries, not the specific ones. So that's something we're also trying to solve. Now, in terms of like plans, improving the personalization aspect I mentioned, like so you can create criteria for different user segments in Blueprints easier. Not necessarily the same way as collections does, because maybe there is a better way, maybe that's the best way, but obviously there is improvement in Blueprints for doing that. Adding more capabilities on the filtering part, like filtering by owner, file type, status, translation. So just mention a few that coming up from feature request and feedback on the plans, and to turn these contextual and conditional query building to configuration driven, that also has potentials. The schema is already there. We're just sometimes lacking a good UI for that. And in terms of like future or thinking part, we might make Blueprints work at site and asset library level. Or there would be ways to leverage analytics data directly in the query builder, both individual and aggregated. So for example, you can create dynamic scoping, for example, like give me content from the size the user visited. in the past hour. You need data that AC could track. We could have this used directly as context information. And yeah, it might mean that at a point we just have one query builder and no longer having the current dynamic and manual collection builders. I brought you a few design screenshots from the updated query builder we're working on. So you can see it features familiar parts like the scope, the source. We keep the query elements and order. Order is basically the current sort configuration enhanced. You will have another screenshot. Source is the enhanced version of searchable types, now featuring subtype selection. Scope, again, just like in collections, you can select sites and asset libraries. Or to mention another thing, this new combo multipurpose search engine agnostic filter field, which features those similar criteria like tags, categories, and keywords, but it's not giving you search index document fields. It gives you fields, the name of the labels that the user creates, like creating an object definition or a structure field. That's very important because in Blueprints, when it comes to fields, because it comes from the search side, you deal with search index fields. But what we really want to enable people is just to choose from what they also see in other parts of the product. And the order, which still features the ability to enter the JSON configuration, but now you're getting ways to just choose from like order by type, relevance, or combine them in the same query builder. As a closing point, yeah, hopefully what we will achieve resembles more to the second image. So we don't want to have a Frankenstein's query builder. Obviously, that's not the goal. But really, the point is to unify these and find ways to build on the strengths and the similarities and close those gaps as much as possible. To have one query builder to help you all. Thank you.